Hello and welcome to episode 14 of the Motogp Xtra podcast. This week, the Motogp circus headed to Misano for the San Marino Grand Prix. I'm Rhys, and joining me as usual to discuss the events of the weekend is Dylan, aka Dill469. So we'll get straight into things with Moto 3. Probably not the most interesting race in the world, but there was a pretty big change in the championship, a pretty big event that happened with Sergio Garcia. So I'll hand straight over to you, Dill. What did you think to that? Because I know you're going to have some strong opinions on this.
You bet. I have even more strong opinions that we haven't discussed already. So I'll be bringing Alberto Arenas into that. Yeah, he's not even in the class, and I'll be dragging his name through the dirt. We'll get to that in a second. But we'll start off with the weekend. All was normal. It was actually a bit more normal in qualifying. There was less dawdling on the race line. In practice, it was the worst I've ever seen. Nobody got a penalty. They obviously were on holidays too, race direction, because they decided just not to give anyone a penalty, even though at one point there was like 15 riders on the outside curb. We're not going to go into it. Nobody got hurt, thankfully, but race control need to pull the finger up. But getting to Garcia, his race went from bad to worse to pretty much game over and a big, massive championship fault, and just he's starting to misfire now, whereas his teammate is running on all four and he's looking like the championship challenger. His race got off to a risky start. He had a collision in turn 1, cut across the turn 2 kind of section, did lose enough time that he didn't get a penalty, even though people were kind of speculating, did he not, but he was actually kind of forced out, and he was kind of like, well look, wasn't my position to be there. About 2 laps later, coming into turn 4, Rio has a very silly crash, overriding, pushing so hard to make up a gap in a long Moto 3 race, took the front and slid into the gravel, came back into the pits. His team tell him, look, there's riders crashing, it's a long race, anything can happen, go back out. He goes back out, just in front of his teammate, leaves the lead group go through, falls in with the second lead group, so we'll say P8 to P15, and decides, I'm going to just start battling E for the crack. Starts battling and passing Ortola for God knows what reason. Did this for laps and was just in the pack. Like, it just blows my mind. Why? What idea was the team doing? Because afterwards, the team were kind of arguing with race directions. Like, oh, well, he's not doing anything wrong. He's fucking a lap down. He shouldn't be battling people and ruining their race. It is so dangerous, so disrespectful. And I brought up Alberto Arenas. He did this 2020, I believe, against Ayagora. In Valencia, he crashed, came back out, joined the lead group, and started messing around with Ayagora, who was in the championship title hunt at the time, versus Alberto Arenas. Now, I still do not like the fact Ayagora lost the championship to Alberto Arenas after he pulled such a disgusting move to come back out a lap down and basically start to try and... Basically, he wanted to put him off. He was hopefully forcing him to crash, even though he was a lap down. It was disgraceful riding. Now, in fairness to Garcia, he let the front group go, but there's no reason why he should be battling the likes of P10, P12, P15. He should have dropped right back to the field, giving him maybe 20 seconds head start. The team should have been more aware, leaving him go back out on track, that he was coming out into the pack. So it was just a whole messy situation. He got black flagged rightly. Don't know why his team was arguing with race direction that he was like, well, he's in the right. He's not. It was stupidity. And it really annoyed me, and I'm still not a fan of Alberto Arenas years later after he pulled something, and I was never a huge fan of Garcia. He's a great talent, but he's a bit aggressive, and pulling that sort of move now in the race, no, he's gone down to my books.
Yeah, I got to say, that's the first thing I thought as well about the Arenas thing, and it is worth noting that it's the Aspar team yet again. So, I don't know, you say about them arguing, maybe they think that's an acceptable tactic, but then why would you use it against yourself? But again, I suppose, in fairness to Garcia, he wasn't battling with any championship contenders. It was just bizarre, is all, because he wasn't really deliberately hindering anybody. He was just battling people that he was a lap behind for some reason. It seemed very strange. I thought initially maybe he caught that group, maybe dropped back, caught them, was trying to carve his way through, but he didn't. It didn't seem like that actually was the case. So very, very strange. The reason why he was sort of trying to make up a gap as well, because he had that contact with Onchu at Caro corner as well, which he forced him off the track as well. So he had the first corner one, then he hit the back of Onchu, lost more time, then he had the crash, then the black flag. So a really scrappy weekend, again, like you say as well, with his momentum. Probably starting to lose it. Probably Guevara getting in his head a little bit as well there by being at the front and having some good pace. So Garcia just doing some weird behaviour, and I got to totally agree with you there. He's definitely gone down in my estimations. I quite liked him, really. I thought I know he's quite aggressive, but he tends to be fairly clean with his aggression. But doing stuff like that, again, I'm the exact same with the Arenas thing. I've always lost respect for Arenas since then, and I've got to say definitely the same here with Garcia. But of course, with Garcia scoring no points, that probably brings us on to Guevara, obviously his main championship rival. Pretty good race from Guevara. Initially, he sort of pulled a bit of a small gap, but then he kind of got caught up. But then that sort of brought into a bit of a battle with Foggia and two of the Red Bull KTM bikes. So, bit of a battle there. What did you think of that good scrap there with Guevara, Foggia, the two Red Bull bikes?
So start off with Eisen Guevara. He pulled a lovely gap early on and looked like the usual Lorenzo of Moto 3. Looked like if he had 2 or 3 laps, he could just build a gap and just take a tenth or two out every second, or every sector I should say, and pull a second or two every few laps. Now, he got to the front, but there was a group of 4. It was Messia, it was Danny Holgato, and Dennis Foggia. Now, Foggia just was able to hang on to him. He was kind of maybe stretching the gap, but Foggia did manage to pass him, and that was critical to the front 4's race, because I reckon if Guevara managed to just kind of clear the 2-second gap, I think the race was over. I think it was a battle for P2 of them. But the fact Foggia managed to bully his way back through the pack, or back through the top group and get to the lead, was huge for the race. Otherwise, it would just, they wouldn't have been able to pull that gap back there. It was a very tactical race. I was watching thinking, this is a very 1-2-5 race. A lot of riders very close, following, using slipstream, making the others do the work, and they were all kind of thinking tactically. And I was kind of sitting there going, this is really interesting to watch. Most weeks you see 2 riders pass into each corner, you see so much slipstream, you see one going left, one going right, weaving on the straights, someone having a moment under the brakes, sitting someone up. This was 4 in a line. They were just following each other around. They didn't look like they were taking much out of their tyre. When Foggia got to the front of the pack, he did drop the pace a touch. I think Guevara's pace at that time was slightly stretching him, so he brought the pace back. Now, that did bring 2 riders from behind, Dennis Onchu and his teammate, or Foggia's teammate, Sir Tatsuki Suzuki, back into the pack. And for a while there was a group of 6, but slowly again started to drift out, and this time Holgato went backwards and Onchu kind of replaced him in the top 4. It came towards the end of the race, and pretty much Guevara got pretty unlucky, went back to the back of the group, and they were just slightly starting to up the ante on the passing. There's a bit more aggression. It was also worth mentioning that
Onchu was there.
yeah, I was just going to say it was worth that Onchu kind of came in and shook a few feathers up, and he also was injured as well. He seemed in quite a bit of pain after the race, apparently a training accident, and he's done some damage to a collarbone, so he looked quietly in the race. He seemed okay, but in the paddock and the pit box afterwards, the poor boy looked like he was in a fair deal of pain after the race. But overall, it was a great race from the 4 of them, and it does bring Foggia maybe back into the championship. Again, he's made history, the first Moto 3 rider to win at the same track 3 times. Like, if Guevara crashes out, like, there was a great point made by BT that Guevara's never been to any of the flyaways. He's going to be a rookie there again, so there'll be small bits of leeway and small bits of advantage going to Foggia as we go forward. Will it be enough? I don't think so. I think Guevara is the quickest of the 3 now. Definitely seems the most consistent. He isn't as much of a scrapper as his teammate, but he's quicker outright than Foggia, so he's in a bit of happy medium there. But it will be interesting to see when we go to the likes of Thailand and Motegi and tracks like that. Will he struggle, or will he be at the front? That'll be kind of what makes up this title, I believe.
I suppose the advantage he's got there is the fact that a lot of the Moto3 riders haven't ever been there before. So, yes, Foggia might have an advantage over him, but the rest of the field probably won't. So he should still be there. I'm interested to see Foggia at Australia, actually, Phillip Island. I reckon he will go very well there. It's just a kind of track. I was actually quite impressed with him today overall, because he seemed to be a little bit more back on the pace after a bit of a rough weekend at Austria. The Leopards in general looked a little better this race. I think that was just because of the track layout. I don't think they've altered anything. I think it's just less start-stop corners, so kind of helps them a little bit. And Foggia was nice and aggressive, which is something you don't tend to see from Foggia. He kind of does struggle a little bit with those overtakes. So I was quite impressed to see Foggia, and again, Guevara once again riding absolutely perfectly. Just got a little bit unlucky. You do get these things, but you know what? Third place again, teammate no points. That's really changed up this championship. Foggia now probably an outside bet again, so I'm quite looking forward to these. Aragon and then these flyaways. I reckon it could be quite juicy in Moto 3. But moving on to Moto 2, then a race that was pretty attritional, lots of crashes. I can't probably even tell you everybody that crashed in this race. I know the first guy that crashed was Jake Dixon, but he made it through 1.5 corners, I think that was.
Well, he made it out of turn 1 and kind of crashed through and over turn 2 is what I would say.
The Alberto Nasca crash, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bit out of there. But yeah, pretty attritional race, lots of riders going down. So what did you think of that? I think it was something to do with the conditions, or was it just people pushing too hard? Because we do know that Misano can get quite greasy.
Just before we jump into Moto 2, actually, I just want to make a point that Foggia will be in Moto 2 next year. He has signed with the Ital Trans team. Since our last podcast, we forgot to mention it in the Moto 3 topics. Just said I'd send it in there before the Moto 2 section. But back to the track, it got to a point where it's about 12 o'clock in Misano, that kind of time. It gets very hot. They had mixed conditions throughout the weekend, and Misano, it was resurfaced about 6 years ago, I think, off the top of my head, a good few years ago now. So it's gotten a bit worn again, and it does get very greasy. It's just one of those European tracks. The heat gets to it, and it just gets a hot track, and maybe the lack of hot track temperature all weekend maybe just made it a bit difficult. There was a lot of crashes, so many crashes in the first 5 laps. We had a lot of crashes at the front, the midfield, the rear. It wasn't just the back markers. It wasn't people knocking each other off. There was just a lot of people kind of seemingly tucking the front out of nowhere. It was a very attritional race, you must say. I agree with you saying with the attritional race fact. But overall, all the championship leaders, all they had to kind of really do was just go, right, this is a race now where I could easily lose 20 points to a rival. I just have to see the checker flag. Fortunately, one of them didn't. We'll come to that later. But it kind of got to a point where when I was watching, I was kind of thinking, yeah, they can't really bridge the gaps because they're all kind of on the limit with tires. They're all kind of going, well, if I make that extra 1 or 2% push, I'm probably going to see the front end in the gravel. So it kind of was a front limited track today, just with the heat and the temperatures and overall track conditions. So it was a bit of a lonely race for a lot of the front guys. There were kind of gaps everywhere, and again, I think everyone was just kind of going, well, if I can just stay on, maybe someone else around me might fall off, and that was kind of the attitude a lot of riders had today.
Well, you mentioned it there, that one of the championship rivals didn't actually manage to get to the end of the race, so we may as well talk about it now. Navietti, once again, another crash, 2 crashes in a row. I think that's 3 the whole season now. Or actually, he had a DNF in Mugello, but that was a mechanical, and then he's had 2 crashes now. I believe that's it. Do correct me if I'm wrong. But
Texas, he crashed in Texas.
Texas, yes. I knew there was another crash somewhere.
I think he crashed in Le Mans as well. I could be wrong though.
He ran off of the gravel in Le Mans, didn't he?
Yeah.
He come back. He actually had a pretty good race in Le Mans after that. But yeah, Vietti, I think that's it for him now. Championship over. We've kind of been speaking about him all year. We've been a bit unsure of him. You know, he started off the season so well at these weird kind of flyaway races. And to be fair, that is the majority of what's left now. So he could very well be wrong. He could end up fighting back at some of these weirder races and claiming a few victories. But he started off strong there. But ever since we got back to Europe, he's never really seemed to be on the pace. A couple of races, he seemed quite good. Obviously, in Austria, he was picking up the pace till he crashed, catching the 2 Idemitsu bikes. This weekend, up until the race, he looked phenomenal. He looked quick through practice, which you'd expect because they basically lives here. All the VR46 guys have done probably more laps than anyone will ever do in total at this circuit. So there you go. They've always got a bit of a home track advantage there, the VR46 guys. So he looked rapid all weekend, didn't get the start, sort of, he had a bit of a battle. I think Canet pulled a couple of harsh moves on him, which, nothing too egregious, don't get me wrong, just saying, it kind of probably rattled him a bit. And then just a simple front end took it to Rio. It's easily done. We've seen many people do it in the past. We'll see many people do it in the future. But really a costly error when he was really starting to fall out of this championship hunt anyway. He's pretty much sealed his fate for me.
Yeah, it kind of turns out this year was just maybe one step too far. Like at the start of the season, I personally was thinking, look, it's going to be a building year for him. I reckon he'll do something special in some races. and he might be on it here or there. He might have a good race every once in a while. He might be up there in races that we don't expect, but he started so well. We all kind of went, oh, whoa, is this guy going to run away with it? Is he going to be on it like Remy Gardner the year before, where he just starts the season well and just takes that wave the whole way forward? And it didn't really materialize after we got to Europe. For whatever reason, he got quite lucky in a lot of races where he would, like we look back to Argentina, he was having a bad weekend, everyone else crashed in front of him, and he ends up scoring big points because he actually was having a bad weekend, and when the rain hit, the front riders crashed and he got red flagged before he basically crashed. So there was a lot of things going from at the start of the year, and I reckon luck always kind of balances out. So he's had his fair share now of bad luck with the kind of the crash in Texas. It was kind of like apparently a gust of wind just took the weight off the front and pushed him wide. He also did DNF as well in Germany. I just looked at the statistics there while you're talking. So he's had quite a few zeros throughout the Germany, Mugello, and obviously the last two races. So he's had a few no scores now, which have kind of leveled out his luck, we'd say. But it's a total building year. We've got to remember he is 20. It's his second year in the class. Next year, if he has another competitive bike, there is question marks over the VR46 team in Moto 2 for the 2023 season. So again, if he has,
it's gone, isn't it?
It's gone. So it'll be interesting to see where.
Fantastic.
Yeah, if will they be as good as VR46? VR46 has been brilliant. They've had Luca Marini, they've had Pecco, they've had Bezzecchi, now they've had Vietti. They've actually turned out some brilliant middleweight riders.
Yeah, they're a pretty well-oiled machine, that team.
Yeah, so
they don't tend to make mistakes. They're like one of the top teams.
It'd be interesting to see next year if maybe he doesn't have the team behind him, if the bike isn't as well-rounded. Is this his best chance of a championship, or will he build on next year? I believe he'll build on it. He's been quite highly rated since he came into the Moto 3 paddock, and he blew everyone away to start the season with them victories, showed some serious form. So building year from he learned from these mistakes and come back stronger next year, I believe.
Yeah, to be honest, I suppose he can be pretty happy with what he's done, because I don't think anybody thought he was going to be fighting for the championship this year. They just thought he would be building a little bit more on the good performances that he showed last year. So also talking about the championship, we'll probably talk about we may as well just cover all the contenders now. Obviously, Augusto Fernandez, mainly. Pretty good race from him, actually. He's had a bit of a tough weekend. He had a fair few crashes throughout practice and qualifying. Didn't have the best start, dropped back a bit. But he just took his time, kept a cool head, carved his way back through up to third place. So, you can't really fault him for that. Great race from him, keeping it calm. Managed to take the lead back from Iagora, who also struggled a bit. But similarly, again, we were talking about the attritional conditions, just keeping it upright. So those two champions rides, really. Obviously, Fernandez even more so because he got a really good result out of it. But both of them keeping a level head in tricky conditions, maintaining their points positions. And there's a little bit of change, but ultimately not a lot because the positions weren't too big. So, yeah, pretty good race for both of those guys. They saw Vietti go down and just took the time, I suppose.
You hit the nail on the head there with the champions ride. It was exactly what I would call Augusto's race. All weekend, it just wasn't clicking for him. Had a big crash on Saturday morning, a real egg beater, and it did kind of seem like it cost him in the rest of Saturday. He was decent in warm-up, but then the race struggled early and then dug deep. Again, like you said, a championships ride just pulled through when it got tough for him. Probably didn't have the right setting in. He's been good there before. He won there in 2019, and overall he's on a good run, but it was kind of question marks if he'd crashed like that now early in the weekend, then crashed again, didn't have an amazing qualifying. Would he be able to pull himself out of the fire and put in a good race performance? And he came through, in fairness, and ended up with a great P3, and it was a great result for his championship. Takes back the lead, as you said. So a good result for him in a very kind of spotty weekend, a few mistakes. In Iagor's case, he was another one. He crashed in turn 6 in, again, Friday morning. So it wasn't a perfect weekend for any of the three championship rivals. Iagor, again, I always feel like there's the 100%, there's my line, I'll just take a touch back off and that's where I'll finish. He doesn't seem to make mistakes in the race. I don't believe he had anything on the table after today. I think that was everything. P5 wasn't bad. Vietti, didn't lose a lot of points, like you mentioned, to Augusto. Overall, it was a solid move. When we go to the likes of Motogp, Thailand, Sepang, hot circuits, it'll be his kind of weather. I reckon he'll flourish. It'll be the tracks that he grew up probably racing on. It'll be them temperatures, the heat. I'd reckon he'll be more well drilled and more conditioned to that sort of temperature. And it'll be interesting to see, will he be able to take a hold of the championship in the flyaways.
He could well do. It'll be also worth noting that Chantra will probably be performing well in those conditions as well. So just another rider to sort of get in the bunch there, and hopefully he'll. Hopefully for that team, he'll help out his teammate. But I'm sure he'll be going for glory a bit himself as well. But let's go on to the race winner now. Then Alonso Lopez. Did anybody even see him after lap one? What a performance! I mean, I just want to take a little second to talk about basically his journey. What a journey it's been. Obviously, he stepped in. Romano Fenati got sacked. I think we all think that was a little unfair, but you can't really argue that they definitely made the right call in terms of putting a different rider on the bike. Because look at Alonso Lopez himself, the victim of being kicked out of a team a bit unfairly from Husqvarna a couple of years ago. Rebuilt himself in the CV Championship, and what a season he's had. He's been so good. Basically, since just before the summer break, he's really clicked. I mean, he's been pretty quick since he got on that bike, to be fair, but ever since Assen, he's led every single race at some point. Very nearly won back in Silverstone. He's really just building, and what a dominant performance. And to be honest, can we now, this is the first time we've seen a non-Kalex win since Brad Binder on the KTM back in 2019. First time we've seen a speed-up win, a Bosco Scura, although it is the speed-up team, so I guess I was kind of correct in saying that, since Fabio Quartararo won in the Catalan GP, and I guess technically the Japanese Grand Prix before he got disqualified. So can we say now that, the Bosco Scura, is it now sort of a good enough bike to win on? Because it seems to be pretty competitive every weekend now. Even Aldeguer is there a lot of the time. He just, he's really is a rookie, so he kind of is struggling a little bit, I guess, because he's so young, and I guess he's got such a good teammate now. I think it's probably getting to him a bit, but I'd go as far as say, the Bosco Scura is not a bad bike anymore. Whatever they did over the winter certainly improved that bike.
I'm not as convinced you are. I'm still, I look at the start of the season, Aldeguer had quite similar to Vietti, actually. When Vietti started to struggle, so did Firmin. Now, of course, you've had this young, hungry guy, Alonso or Lopez, jumping onto the bike in a bit of a questionable terms for the team. Again, the rider has no choice. He already got screwed out by Max Racing earlier in the season. So it's kind of a two wrongs don't make a right, but it's kind of ended up that way for Alonso. Now, I look at the speed up of Bosco Scura chassis as a very stiff bike, even stiffer than the Kalex. It always has been. A race like this today, maybe it just suited the conditions better. Now again, you could go back, Lopez over the last few races or across different conditions has been fast, but I still don't think it's anywhere near the Kalex over a 2022 race season, and that's what you need in modern day racing. You can't, if we look back at the Ducatis from maybe the GP 13 to GP 18, they had bogey tracks, and that's what cost them titles. They couldn't show, they'd turn up at Assen, they'd turn up at Sachsenring, Phillip Island, and the bike just would not work. And they're like, well, we're pretty much screwed here. And I still think the speed up / Bosco Scura is quite similar to that some weekends it will be the bike to be on, and some weekends a top 10 is a massive result for them. So if they can make another step for the 23 season, keep the two boys on it, Firmin Aldeguer and Alonso Lopez, there's no reason why they don't have two exceptional riders that can maybe make the difference against the Kalexes. But for now, I still just have my question marks and my doubts over whether that's the bike to be on. It does show pace at times, but I still don't believe that it's the bike to be on for a whole full season.
Yeah, I perhaps over-egged it slightly there, but I just mean it's obviously still not as good as a Kalex, but it's now sort of good enough you can win a race on it if it goes right. Yeah. Whereas I think the past few years or so, you couldn't say that. I mean, we saw Canet struggle to do that. We saw Navarro, we saw Didier Antonio. Well, actually, we spoke about the 2019 race here when we talked about Fernandez. Obviously, that was with Digi, and that is actually why we have the track limits rule on the last lap as well, because of that famous race. So it does have a bit of history going here, but I just felt like it's been a bit more consistent. So perhaps it is bit of a better motorcycle, but it could just be the bloke on it. We've seen that with Quartararo in the past. It could just be Alonso Lopez is that exceptional. He really could be. I mean, we could end up seeing him win a MotoGP championship in like 4 years' time and be like, wow, remember that guy? He was how he got almost lost his whole career. So, yeah, it is one of those things, I suppose. It is just a bit of an interesting thing to note. We'll move on to MotoGP now. Before we actually get into the weekend, there was a fair bit of news on the approach to the weekend. Probably the biggest one, well, I don't know, actually, they're all pretty big, to be fair. But probably the one we've kind of been waiting for a while. Who's going to get the Factory Ducati seat? And Enea Bastianini has finally he's finally been confirmed for having that seat. So we always knew he was going to get promotion, but was it going to be to Pramac or was it going to be to Factory? And he's usurped Jorge Martin, jumped straight up to be Pecco Bagnaio's teammate for the 2023 season. So great for Bastianini. Probably a bit upsetting for Martin. What's your take on that?
I think we both made predictions in the last podcast and we were wrong. I was heavily thinking it was Jorge Martin. I felt like he's a higher... I think we've mentioned that he's a higher ceiling. We both rated him more in the junior classes. And we've gotten to... I was actually, when I saw it, I wasn't sure if it was a real or kind of a fan-made one or whatever, and I actually had to do a bit of digging up to make sure it was the real decision, and it turned out it was. And I was kind of going, I suppose, yeah, he is deserving of it, but I still think Martin is better. But then I'm still kind of split because I go, yeah, well, he's good enough. He's done better than Jorge Martin this year. But surely you want the... You don't... Alright, like, if you go back 5, 6, 7 years and you put Lorenzo and Davi, which one would you want for a title? You wouldn't say Davi, and I kind of would reason with Davi is more like a Bastianini. He is good on his tyres. He's kind of a good race pace, whereas Lorenzo has a flair. He has that outright pace. He has that just raw talent that is rare and comes along once in every 10 years. So maybe the fact that they went for Rossi, they went for Iannone, they went for Lorenzo, maybe they feel like they have to go with more of a Davi now to get towards the title in the GP class. So it'll be interesting. It'll be another step again. You have to remember this is only Bastianini's second year in the class. A bit like Vietti in Moto 2. He'll have to make a step next year again. And there's always a lot more pressure in a factory team. So I wish him well. If he makes a similar step that he made this year to last year, there's no reason why he couldn't push Marquez and Quartararo for the title and his teammate, of course.
Yeah, I think overall I've got to pretty much agree with that. Bastianini needs obviously to step up again, but he's had such a good season. I think he does deserve the seat. I think the only thing they do kind of risk is they've probably maybe alienated Martin now. So, if he gets an offer, let's say, Franco Morbidelli, well, let's be honest, he's going to be out the door at the end of next year. I don't think it would be the best move to jump on a Yamaha, but, if you're being offered a factory seat all of a sudden, could you take that kind of thing? So that is probably the only thing they do run the risk with there. But I think based on this performance from this season, you got to say Bastianini's got it. Yes, you could say Martin's been quicker in the junior categories. Yes, he was quicker last year, but they've made the decision based on this year. Bastianini's won many races, almost won again today. Obviously they've made the decision before that, but overall definitely look better. Martin's still got a bit of growing to do, so I think definitely keeping in a satellite team, bit less pressure for him. Probably, I'd say a little bit less development work, but they do make the Pramac guys do a lot of development, so probably not, to be honest, a little bit less development work, but a bit less pressure, shall we say, not being in that factory red. Just whilst he's finding his feet a bit more, probably will do Jorge a little bit of good.
Just before we move on from Jorge as well, it is good to note that he's on a 1+1 contract, meaning he has 1 year for next year and he can sign a second year if he wants, which means he's very viable to a move to Honda, to Yamaha. Basically, he is way, way higher chance of him moving on now. Just that I put that in before we move on, that his contract is kind of not sealed with Ducati anymore. He is quite likely that he could leave the team if things don't go right for him at Ducati.
Yep, and actually on that point, it's worth noting that Bastianini is actually on a 2-year deal, so it's not like he will have this year and then let's say he wins a championship or something and they promote him. He can't get promoted. There's no space there, so he knows he's not going to be on a factory Ducati till at least 2025. So, yeah,
the chances of him moving on are really high.
Pretty high now, yeah. He can probably take anything that's offered to him there. But moving on to the next point then this time, we got Andrea Dovizioso. His final race, obviously, it's a bit of a shame, I guess, overall. Bit strange also to see a rider leave mid-season. I mean, I think we spoke about this before, talking about how Dovi announced his retirement and how it sounded like he wanted to leave at Mugello, but they basically couldn't line up a replacement for the rest of the year. So I think they forced him to stay until this point where they could get Cal Critchlow in for the rest of the year. So, yeah, a bit of a shame, really, for Dovi because his comeback's not been great. The way he sort of got ousted from Ducati wasn't great either. So, unfortunately, since really the end of 2019, it's not quite gone Dovi's way, but he's had a good career, second in the world 3 times, 125cc world champion, great rider in 250. Even the years in MotoGP where he wasn't second in the championship, he's pretty good, battling with Valentino Rossi in his debut Grand Prix. He's been a fantastic rider, like you were talking about earlier. The Lorenzo Dovi thing. Everybody put their money behind Jorge Lorenzo would be the guy that would be fighting for the title with Ducati, but it was actually Dovizioso. So, you know what, a bit of a sad end to a good career, but at least he ended it at home, I suppose.
Yeah, and ended up in P12, so you got to take
probably about his best race of the season, I think.
Yeah, ironically, yeah, it's
kind of like Rossi last year.
Yeah,
Valencia,
just the same. That top 12 at the end of your career, it's not a bad way to go out. But there was comments in the media saying that he pretty much had realised that he made the wrong decision coming back after he rode the bike here last year. He realised how far off Yamaha were. He realised how much he'll have to change and adapt. And for a rider in his mid to late 30s, after a year off coming back, it was a bridge too far for him. And unfortunately, I wouldn't say it's tarnished his reputation, but it's just...
Yeah, we'll have forgotten all about this in a couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Marquez.
When
it's like
we
Rossi,
see,
everyone's already forgot about 2021.
Yeah, exactly. When Dovi is at the Mugello Grand Prix in 2026, they'll show footage of him winning it in the 17s, they'll win him for the battle for 18, 19, and they'll show all the highlights of Austria and his Barcelona wins and his Moto or his world title in the 250 classes and everything else that goes with him. They'll never really show the fact that he was on an RNF Yamaha for half a season, so it didn't work. He still had that itch. He's now scratched the itch and realised that the sport has moved on. It's not for him anymore, and he'll go away and he'll do some Italian motocross, which he is damn good at, and he'll enjoy his time off. So wish him well, thank him for all the memories, and hope he's enjoyed his career as much as we have watching him.
Yes, hopefully he has. Now, of course, we were just talking about probably one of the biggest things in Dovi's career was battling Marc Marquez. So who better to talk about now than Marc Marquez? He has, obviously, he announced that he was coming back to test this week. So there's a private test, well, not a private test, an official MotoGP test on Tuesday and Wednesday after this Grand Prix. Obviously, we're recording this on Sunday night, so we have no idea what's going to happen in that test, obviously, when this goes out or anything like that, although it goes out on Monday anyway, so I suppose you would know that. But either way, just thought I'd preface that. Obviously, we saw Mark training with the 600 earlier on in the week at the Aragon karting track, so the karting track that's inside the Aragon circuit. He was looking pretty good already. Coming back for testing, it seems like by the sounds of it, if testing goes well, he's going to come back completely. So we could be seeing the return of Marc Marquez here.
Yeah, it's it's a bit of an interesting one. He came to Austria and it was all like, well, he's coming back just to motivate the team, this, that, and the other. But apparently he came back to get a medical check to see if he could test a GP bike, which he passed. Then jumped on a 600 and said, oh my God, there's no way I can ride a full factory GP bike. And then the next day he was like, well, I could probably ride the 600 again, which he did. And it kind of barrel rolled on that. He made baby steps and he started to realise he's probably better off than he thought he was mentally. Now, he did say a couple of weeks ago now that if he has to go through this again, he won't. If he comes back and it doesn't work and the arm fails him again, it will be his time. He said that there's only so much you can mentally put yourself through. He said physically it's just kind of like you get on with it, but he says the mental toll of having to sit there and watch races go by that you should be in and winning and fighting for titles and stuff, he said it's just too much mentally. So he said he'd rather be completely out of the sport before the age of 30 than go on again with another 7, 8, 3 months, whatever it must be, to go off and get a rehabilitation, get surgery, build up the muscle. He said this is the last attempt at becoming a winner again in GP. So it's a bit scary because we could lose Valentino Rossi, Davi, and Marc Marquez all in the space of 18 months if we're unlucky. For the sport, that would be dreadful. I think the sport is in a pretty poor position at the moment. We might come to that later if we get time. But if we are to lose Marquez full time, that will not do the sport any favours. But look, he's back. I hope he gets on well with testing. I'd like to see him back before the end of the year. Honda need him back. They need some sort of direction. Stefan Bard's a great test rider, but they're not making any progress. Nakagami has no confidence on the bike. Alex Marquez is heading off to Ducati next year. Paul crashed in today's race. Looks like he's injured his wrist. He's off to Gas next year. So there's a lot of people going out. It's going to be tough for Honda. They need him back to just get some sort of steady ship going to go into the winter, to come back next year with a much better bike that can give arguably one of the best riders of all time a chance at another title. So I hope for his sake everything starts to snowball and goes well, but we mightn't be seeing Marquez ever back to what he could be.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how he actually returns. I think, to be honest, if he should be, I think he'll be pretty good, because we saw how decent he was last year with like a 30-degree incorrect arm. So if his arm works now, I reckon he should be pretty good. It'll be the bike that holds him back, if anything, to be honest, because the bike is dreadful, quite clearly. Like you're saying, everybody's sort of leaving, has no confidence. So yeah, it is going to be absolutely crucial for Honda's development that Marquez does return and can get them some good feedback. But enough about the news before the weekend. Let's actually talk about the weekend once again. Again, similarly to Moto2, sorry, it was a very attritional race. So many crashes. I think they lost 7 riders in the first 2 laps. Obviously, like you mentioned, there was a crash with Pol Espargaro at the first corner. I think it was Zarco, Pirro, and Pol Espargaro. Zarco had a little bit of contact with Brad Binder, which made him crash. He then just completely skittled out Pirro and Pol Espargaro. So nothing really any of the riders could have done. It was all just a bit unfortunate down towards turn 1. Then we had Jack Miller drop it as well. I think it was at the start of lap 2 at the Rio corner. Who else fell off? There was Digi Antonio fell off. Morbidelli fell off. So plenty of riders crashing right at the beginning of the race. So once again, seem continuing that theme of Moto2. Very greasy track. Easy to make a mistake. Lots of people going down.
Yeah, and it was just... It got to the point where they were on the hard tyre, most of them on the front. A lot of hard tyres were being used, but they still weren't up to temperature, even with this extreme heat. It was taking them a few laps to get in, and a few people just struggled with it. We saw Jack Miller crash out of the lead. He rarely makes them mistakes anymore. It was didn't look like he did much wrong. Just tucked the front straight in at Rio. Bastianini in...
Caro. Yeah, he almost lost the front, didn't he?
He rolled off the edge of the tyre, similar to what Valentino did in 2019, where he just took the front, saved on the elbow, and we would have had such a different race today if he did actually slide out there. It would have been a shame though, because he did give us a bit of action towards the end. But it's just one of those Jerez races, the Barcelona races, where it's just so hot, and you just feel like everyone is on edge, and any moment something could happen, and easily someone could slide off. And it was a credit to the front 4 of Pecco, Marini, Vinales, and Bastianini that they all made very little mistakes throughout the race. They were very consistent, and it was brilliant. I remember watching them thinking, they're so close on a track that is so difficult at the moment in that heat. It was phenomenal. It was just, again, you have to tip your hat sometimes to these guys. They are absolute superheroes what they do week in, week out. So it was great to see such a tight battle on such an attritional race and such a difficult track. And it was great to see how talented. We kind of forget every week or two that when they're throwing it up the inside, he should have been able to pass him there when he's up break him.
Yeah. And
then we forget how hard it is. In a race today like that, where you see people falling off left, right and centre, and then you can understand these guys are the best of the best. So a really tricky race today, but I think a lot of them handle it quite well.
Yeah, I think they did. That top group especially, they were on the limit basically every lap, and the few mistakes they made, they ran wide a few times. You're going to get that. We wouldn't ride playing bloody bike games, so in real life, I imagine it's a lot easier to make a mistake when you're on the limit. So We can't really be slating anybody too much for that. But speaking of people that had good race, Fabio Quartararo, pretty good race, to be honest. Not a great qualifying. That's just the Yamaha for you. You're not going to beat a Ducati when it's got that much power. When it's going in its like top mode or whatever, it's just going to absolutely obliterate you over the course of a lap just because it's got so much more power. Fabio starting 8th place. I think he finished 5th, did he? Pulled a pretty good pass on Aleix. Well, to be honest, Aleix made a mistake, but he was in a position to capitalise. And that was about the only overtake he made. He couldn't really pass anybody else, could he? So it was a pretty decent damage limitation from him, but it is getting to the point where, again, the Yamaha letting him down because really, if he could put it on pole, he probably would check out and win most of these races. We've seen it throughout the season, how much quicker he's been than them at some circuits. When it suits him, he just absolutely checks out. So a good race from him, but it is getting a bit worrying for him now.
Yeah, and his issue started on Saturday when it started to rain in Q1. And then they came out in Q2. A lot of them came out on wet tyres and then instantly went back in for dries. The issue with Quartararo and especially Yamaha is they have to ride from curb to curb. They have to make the track as wide so that they can get to the 63, 4 or 5 degrees of lean and carry maybe 1 or 2, maybe 3 miles an hour more through the apex. And that's where they make their lap time. They don't make it on hit late braking. They don't make it on corner exit. That's where they make their time. On a track like that, the concrete, the actual tarmac will absorb a lot of that water and it'll be so hot from the bikes from the sun. It will just kind of disappear off, it'll evaporate. The painted curbs are completely opposite. They are like a massive bucket. They will just hold water, and if you touch it, you're just gone down. So pretty much what we saw on Saturday was a Yamaha with no corner speed because he couldn't take the extra 3 or 4 miles an hour through the apex like he would, and that's immediately hampered him, putting him so far back on the third row. Then of course Pecco out-qualified him, Jack out-qualified him, Maverick out-qualified. He's not passing them without a mistake. The only overtake, like you said, was a mistake from another rider. We look back to Austria. How many riders did he overtake there? We'll maybe say 1 in Jack Miller. The rest were probably mistakes. Miller, yeah. So this is probably what should have been in Austria if Jorge Martin didn't make mistakes. If Bastianini didn't have a mechanical, he probably would have been nowhere again in that race. He's brilliant when he can have clear track to go up summit. Now today he did struggle more, whether that was down to tyre temps. He did spend a lot of time behind bike, so maybe the tyre just kind of, maybe the heat soak never came back to him. For whatever reason, he just didn't have it in the race, even when he had clear track. But again, we look at Moto 2 and we say champion ride. Again, he took the points. You could easily have slipped off into the gravel today at a tight turn 4 in Tremonto and Caro. Very easy to make them mistakes when you're kind of on the limit, and he brought it home. Now, it wasn't great for his championship. It's down to 30 points between first and second now. But again, it could have been a lot less if he tipped off and lost even more points to the Ducatis. But again, he is doing the most. It's the Yamaha that's leaving him down.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look where the other Yamahas were. Obviously, Morbidelli ended up in the gravel, but probably Morbidelli's best weekend of the year so far, really. He actually got through into Q2, like through the free practice times. I think he's done that a couple of times this year, but not many. He was a bit more in touch, but he was still, like in qualifying, he was still a second slower than Fabio Quartararo. So when you're talking about like 2 or 3 tenths separating like a couple of rows of the grid, being a whole second off your teammate, is quite ridiculous. So again, it is just Fabio making the difference. And like you said, I suppose he couldn't go on the curbs in the qualifying session because they were wet, of course. Then in the race, you just usual Yamaha. You can't outbrake anybody. I mean, it's hard enough to now outbrake in modern MotoGP because of the ride-height devices and stuff and how much speed they carry into the corners and all that stuff. So it makes it difficult to outbrake, but even more so when you're in the Yamaha that just doesn't really excel at that. So yeah, Fabio pretty much did the best that he could. But with Bagnaia winning, that does definitely change things in the championship because Bagnaia is now up to second. So it's no longer Aleix, the main rival. And I think we've seen for the last couple of races, Aleix has kind of dropped off a little bit. So I think it is basically now a repeat of last season with a head-to-head directly between Bagnaia and Quartararo. And to be fair, I'll absolutely eat my words because I can't remember which race it was now, but there was a podcast where I was just like, Bagnaia's not got a chance. He's 80 points behind, or he's now only just 60, even with this crash. He's nowhere. He's not going to do anything. He's like he's too far behind, he's made too many mistakes. And now, all of a sudden, 6 races to go, 30 points. If he wins every race, that is now enough for him to win the World Championship. So you can't say he's out of it at this point, because Fabio's not going to finish second in every race, especially with Aragon coming up. And the Ducati is good enough where Bagnaia could win every race. I just think now it's pretty much Bagnaia versus Bagnaia at this point.
That's a very, very good way of saying it. I think that was the Assen podcast, judging by the crash from Pecco or from Fabio.
It was, yeah.
Just before we go to that, I just want to touch a bit on Morbidelli. He was taken out today. Best weekend by far. It's his third time in Q2 this season. Now, he's made a lot of this year. It's been, I need to redevelop the bike and design the bike this way, do that and the other. And they've tried some different things with the bike. The last 3 races, he'd made step each weekend. They've just focused on getting him comfortable on the bike, and it's working. Now, of course, today he was taken out, so it's a bit awkward for him to say, well, I don't know what my race pace would have been. He was P6 in FP4, which is just solely race pace, so you never know. He might have had a good race today. It's a shame, really. I was really disappointed when I saw that he had been taken out. So, again, we might see something towards the end of the season. He has a contract for next year. A lot of people have ruled him out that he's gone no matter what he does. But if he starts to come back, if he starts to finish top 5, top 6, you only need one man to win you the world title. Ducati have had so many attempts at having 2 riders go for it. Maybe it's not a bad thing having Frankie Morbidelli coming home in P6, P5, P7, P4 and being a very consistent number 2. But we'll see how it goes from the rest of this year and next season, of course. But going back to Pecco, now I'm still not convinced that, like you said, Pecco versus Pecco. I think Pecco will lose out against Pecco. I think he still has a mistake in him. I still don't trust him. He crashed in Austria again in practice. He crashed again this weekend. Like Fabio Quartararo, touch wood, does not crash at all. He is so good.
He didn't crash today, actually. Anyway. When Vinales was harrying him, and then when Bastianini was harrying him, I thought he could tip off. But to be fair, he did actually keep his head.
Yeah, it's just like Fabio was so good that he might have a lower ceiling with the bike and the package, but he gets 99% out of it, whereas I think Pecco probably only gets about 90-95% out of a good weekend. So I can see why everyone's hyping up this run-in. So we're going to Ducati tracks. We're going to tracks that Fabio doesn't like. He detests Aragon. He cannot ride it in a way he likes it. He had a bad crash there a couple of years ago on the Petronas Yamaha. It's just not a track he likes. It just will not suit him. I wouldn't be surprised if he pulls out a podium. He's just that good. He is Rossi Marquez level, in my opinion, these days. He just has the extra couple of percent. He is the alien of the field. When Marquez come back, I reckon there'll be 2 aliens there. I don't rate Pecco highly enough to call him an alien. He still has too many mistakes. He is phenomenal on the bike, but the mistakes kill him. All great riders do not make mistakes at the pressure. Valentino over his long career, Marquez through the last 7 or 8 years has been brilliant and not making mistakes when the pressure's on. Pecco still makes them. I have my doubts about Pecco, but the run-in is going to be very interesting. It'll be tough for Yamaha, strong for Ducati. It'll just be... it's so hard to call because we go, right, Motegi, Ducati. Chang, Ducati. Sepang, Ducati. Maybe Yamaha, because Valentino did very well and Lorenzo did very well on the Yamaha for years there.
Vinales won as well.
And
I think Vinales won the last race, was there, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 19, I believe.
Yeah. And Fabio was on pole. Like, Fabio goes well at some of these tracks as well, so even though they seem like... it is hard to call because Fabio was really good at Thailand, he was really good at Motegi when they last went there, so...
Yeah, it'll just be... It's going to be difficult to call. It'll be...
I think the Ducati is going to have the advantage, but
I still think by far, I think nearly every track we go to Ducati will have the advantage.
It's a way better bike.
Yeah,
it's going to be better every track.
But then we might go to a track like Phillip Island where I reckon Fabio will be like Stoner in his heyday or Marquez in Saxon kind of level. I reckon he'll have an advantage there. And then we go to Valencia for the finale. What a terrible track to go to in November when it's cold and blue. I'm even getting flashbacks of 06, of 2017. It's just a horrible place for a championship to go. And for the neutral, it'll be amazing because it'll suit Ducati more. It's stop and start. It doesn't have much flow. It's going to be very difficult to not leak points for the rest of these races for Fabio. If he wins it, I'll be very... I'd be surprised, and I wouldn't. It's just so many. There's just so many like variables that you just can't predict at the moment. Right now, my favorite is still Fabio. I just think he's so much better as a rider. He'll make the difference somehow.
Fair enough. It is tough to call. I mean, again, I do believe Fabio's a better rider. I just think I still think he probably might pull through, but it's just now I think Pecco has a proper chance, whereas before I didn't really think he did. But of course, we did mention before that Aleix Espargaro, not having the last couple of races go his way, is kind of falling a little bit out of contention because now Bagnaia has moved ahead of him. Now, of course, we could be completely wrong, and it could be Aleix that still ends up winning the championship because he's not that far behind. But another weekend, another time Maverick Viñales was the top of Aprilia. Is Viñales now starting to become the top dog there? Of course, he struggled at the end of last year when adapting, but of course he just jumped off the Yamaha straight away, so he needed to adjust. And then he struggled all the way up until around about, I think the Catalonia test. He's kind of found something. He was a bit better at Catalonia as well, but in terms of his actual pace. He finally sort of figured out one lap pace there, and it was like, okay, you've got your one lap pace, now you need to do it over a race stint. And he sort of figured that out come Sachsenring, and then he got on the podium at Assen, and then he got on the podium again at Silverstone. He's really, really performing, and there's been a few races now where he's beaten Aleix, and that basically never happened to Aleix the whole time he's been on the Aprilia. So are we now looking at a bit of a change in the guard there? Because I think most people thought this could happen eventually, because when they've been teammates before, Viñales has definitely been the better of the two.
The way I look at the situation, I look at the two riders. We'll just take Aprilia out of the situation for now. If you put them two side by side, you go, Viñales clearly has the higher ceiling. He's a Moto3 world champion, multiple Moto2 race winner, multiple MotoGP race winner. Ran Marquez close in a couple of years in his first years at Yamaha that he was very quick. Now, the years didn't really progress the way he would have wanted to. Aleix, a great kind of journeyman rider, one race win in his whole MotoGP career, and that's including the junior categories as well. Couple of pole positions, a handful of podiums. A very solid, well-rounded rider, but I still don't think he has the ability of Maverick. Now, I believe right now, well, maybe in Assen, go back to Assen to the start of the year, that kind of period there, he is riding at 105%, whereas I still think Maverick is coming up to the 90-95. I think Maverick is getting there, and I reckon when Maverick gets a full click and when he can start to overtake, the biggest issue for Maverick at the moment, he still can't overtake. He might have been able to win the race today, if he could have overtaken Pecco, but he was stuck behind him, got overtaken then by Bastianini, and then kind of went backwards. So again, Aprilia still just
his move on Bastianini was good though at the start of the race. That was phenomenal.
Yeah, again, I think actually, oddly enough, I think he's quite strong at the start of the race now. He seems to be able to, with the V4, he seems to be able to do something early, but as the race goes on, now again,
he's just so used to having to like absolutely put 100% in at the start.
Yeah, exactly.
So bad.
But going back to a Ducati to overtake, it's almost impossible to overtake anything that isn't a Yamaha. So if you're on an inferior bike or even a Ducati, it is nearly impossible to overtake anything on that grid.
Yeah, you pretty much have to sit the Ducati up if you want to pass it.
You have to do something like Rossi did to Lorenzo in 16, where you just send it up the inside into Caro and pick him up off the race line and basically cause a crash and hope the other rider stops you from causing a crash. Just the only way, and that's nobody really wants to do that because that's how you get. That's what Mir did last year to Ducati and Miller sometimes. It ended in massive arguments and they're still not quite friends. We remember what happened in Qatar at the start of the year. They clashed. So there's just so many different things you have to do to get past the Ducati, and it's not really a feasible thing. So as I am a bit harsh on Maverick for saying, well, he needs to improve in his overtaking, I can kind of understand why he can't. Nobody else can do it, really. Fabio can't do it. Aleix occasionally can do it. It's nearly an impossible task. So, I will mention it in the upcoming test. Michelin are bringing a new front tyre. Apparently it works at a lower temperature, which means they'll be able to push the front more. Higher chance of overtaking. It's meant to bring the race in closer. So hopefully, if everything goes well, we might see it next year and it might improve the racing. Because overall, this year has been pretty poor in terms of bar-to-bar, wheel-to-wheel action. If you look at the terms of BSB, World Superbikes, GP has just fallen in terms of action to them categories. But going back to the Viñales, Aleix, Elate is just going through a bit of a rough patch. Of course, the injury in Silverstone, the bike not working really last time out, having the issue on the grid with the whole shot device, and then this weekend it just didn't click for him, and his teammate was quicker from Friday practice. It'll be interesting to see as the season goes on, will he be able to get a hold of it, or will Maverick have his way with him for the rest of the year?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see because, of course, this has always been a Vinales stronghold as well. Even back in his Yamaha days, think back to 2019, he was third place behind Marquez and Quartararo. 2020, he won that race that Bagnaia crashed out the lead of. I think the other race in 2020, I think he might have been like second behind Morbidelli. So, this has always been a Vinales track. Silverstone was always a Vinales track. Assen was always a Vinales track. So it does, it could be a little bit of a fluke, but yeah, I think he probably will start to have his way a little bit more. But that's pretty much it for this weekend then. So moving on to Aragon in 2 weeks' time. Obviously, we've got a week off with the tests and everything like that. Then we move on to Aragon. What do we think is going to happen there? It's going to be a tough weekend for Fabio Quartararo. We may see the return of Marc Marquez as well. If you remember back to last year, fantastic battle between Marquez and Bagnaia for the win. Again, proving that it's impossible to overtake a Ducati, although I think a fully fit Marquez would have probably just sat him up. But obviously he couldn't quite do that. So any predictions going into this weekend, or is it just a bit too complicated to say?
I'm going to go all eggs in one basket on Pecco. What he did last year against Marquez, again, now a slightly injured Marquez, but he loves that track. It kind of suits Ducati. It's very stop-starty. It's anti-Yamaha. Now, last year we didn't have a Luca Marini on amazing form. We didn't have Bastianini after signing a 2-year contract with a factory team. So in that kind of headspace, we might see some other Ducatis come into it. We might see Miller, but I still would just lean towards the factory Ducati of Pecco for the win. And I'll be very, very keen on watching how Fabio goes about his weekend, how he starts in FP1 to how he ends the race on Sunday. What ways he adjust for that weekend, because it's going to be tough. He doesn't like the track, and you really wouldn't say it's a Yamaha track. Like, it's been dominated by Hondas, and now it looks like it's a bit of a Ducati track. So that massive bus stop onto that long chicane, or out of the long chicane down that back straight, that's just going to leak time to Ducati, to a Honda, to an Aprilia, to a Suzuki, even a bloody KTM. So he's in for a hell of a weekend if he doesn't get his qualifying right. So hopefully for his sake he gets a good qualifying lap and can be there and maybe go with the front guys. Otherwise it could be Qatar all over again, where he's P7, P8 and he's shaking his head as he's across the line.
Yeah, it really could be, but we have seen when his back is against the wall, sometimes it does work for him, and I think sometimes it helps him. I think going into the weekend when he doesn't expect much, he doesn't put so much pressure on it, and I feel like he performs better. I feel like at some of the races this season where I've expected, like everyone was like, oh, Fabio's going to win at Assen, Fabio's going to win at Assen. He crashed making a silly move on a leash. If Fabio's going to win at Silverstone, it doesn't matter that long lap. He'll get to the lead, he'll pull away, or he'll still win. He struggled there, he couldn't pass anybody. But then everybody says, oh, he'll be nowhere at Austria, and there you go. I mean, like we said, of course, he didn't actually make many passes, but again, he made no mistakes. And it's easy to make a mistake. So he just sat there, played it as best as he could. So it could be a bit of a surprise, but yeah, I think I agree. I think it's going to be a tough weekend for Fabio in Aragon. But that's pretty much it then for this episode of the Motogp Xtra podcast. So I hope you have enjoyed that one. If you are watching on YouTube, do give the video a like, because it does help us out quite a lot. Or if you're listening on Spotify, again, similarly, if you could rate us 5 stars, that's much appreciated, because it just helps us out in both algorithms and helps more people discover and enjoy the podcast. But I've been Rhys. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next episode for the Aragon GP.